You have been made with a purpose and given specific gifts to accomplish your mission. This is REQUIP. Stay tuned to gain insights to prepare, equip, and empower you to do the work of ministry. Glad you made it back. We're continuing to talk about mind reset. We have just settled on this promise that God has given in His Word through Jesus that we have the promise of freedom. And in fact, I like to say it this way. We have the opportunity of freedom. God sets us free. When we put our faith in Jesus, we have been taken out of darkness and into His light, as the Bible tells us. But there's so many places where we are mentally bound. We have the opportunity to take it if we want, but we don't have to. But God wants us to walk in that freedom, and we're going to continue to talk about that, and we're going to talk about something that is a critical issue as we continue and we progress. And each one of these messages, they are building on one another. Today, we're going to talk about boundaries. Remember, Romans 12:2 reminds us that we have patterns in this world, and they are in opposition. And in fact, they're in contrast to God's kingdom. And these patterns have a negative cycle and a negative impact on our lives that keep us from having true joy, pleasure, and fulfillment. And I just want to kick this off by talking about, there was this story years ago. This was in the early 2000s. And this little boy, he was about 11 years old, and he was out riding his bike and just having a great time. He came from a suburban home, probably middle upper class family, lived in a nice neighborhood. He was out riding his bike, and out of nowhere, a car hits him. And the bike goes flying. The boy is flying off the bike. The man stops the car, rushes out, checks on the boy, see if he's okay, and offers, "Let me take you back to your house. Let me take care of you." This boy acknowledges, and he gets in the car. But it turns out he was held in captivity for 4 years. And this little boy is named Sean Hornbeck. And this is a real story that happened, and he was held captive. And I went back and looked at some of these details that happened here, and I found one of these old interviews that Oprah Winfrey did when he came on his show. And Sean was freed from this, of course, and he's on this talk show. And Oprah asked a very interesting question. And she asked, "Did you have any freedom?" And Sean said, "I had some freedom." Now, you got to get the context of this. Sean believed he had a little bit of freedom, and he actually did. But you can see how mentally bound he was when I get into some of the details. He was brutally, sexually, and mentally abused for years by this predator that kept him in. And what happened was, as he was in captivity, he used to want to get away. And Sean was then handcuffed and chained to the futon that he was sleeping on. Over time, he wasn't handcuffed anymore. He wasn't chained. He wasn't bound physically. He had some freedoms, as Sean said. "Hey, I had some freedoms. I was able to walk around. I was able to do things." The only thing that happened was he had to take on the identity of this man's son. His abuser, he was actually taking on the identity of his son. He took his last name. He said he was homeschooled, which of course he was not homeschooled. And he was able to ride his bike and go out and live a relatively normal life from the outside. Everyone would say lives a normal life, no big deal, just a kid that's in the neighborhood. And there was one incident that really stuck out to me, where Sean was riding his bike under captivity. He's being held by Michael Devlin, who was his now father in a sense, not legally, but held captive and forced him to call him his father. And Sean actually, I think, began to believe it. And he was out, he had a new bike that his new dad bought him, and he actually lost it. And so Sean and his captor, Michael, went and filed a police report. And a police officer came and talked to Sean and trying to get some descriptions about the bike. And that's just something that really stuck out to me, was that Sean could be literally inches from the very person that could set him free, but he didn't say anything. He was in reaching distance of gaining freedom, but he didn't do anything. There was something on his part that he had to do to get free. He wasn't bound anymore. He wasn't physically bound anymore. He wasn't chained up anymore, but he was in fact chained in his own mind. He didn't actually believe that he could be free. He began to take on his new identity. And there's some things that we learn from this, that God can rescue us, but often our minds keep us in chains. Now, Jesus is the great physician, but he's not a plastic surgeon. Really, Jesus is a heart surgeon. He's not into modifying the outside and modifying the things that are superficial, but he deals with the heart. And he does it by transforming our thinking, and we have the ability to renew our mind, to really gain the healing that we can get. And there's a very good story, interesting story that I love, found in 2 Kings chapter 5, 1 through 19. And it is a story of this great leader, this great commander, and his name is Naaman. And a little bit of background on him: he is a Syrian commander from that nation, and they are actually battling against the Israelites. God apparently was giving the Syrians these great victories, and God's hand was with them as sort of a discipline back to the Israelites for their disobedience. But it says something so interesting here. Verse 1, it says, "He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper." God gave the Syrian army victories against Israel by assigning this title, though he was a leopard. It is meant to convey and meant to mar the reputation of this great warrior, Naaman, this great leader, but he was a leper. It's like saying you have done all these amazing things, but you have this outward distinction of status you cannot outperform. In some strange turn of events, the Syrians conducted one of their many raids and actually kidnapped a little Jewish girl. And Naaman's wife took her as her own, and she became her handmaiden, and she served this commander's wife. And out of nowhere, for some reason, this Israelite girl finds out, notices, of course, that Naaman is a leper, and she says, well, my God can heal him. And Naaman, who is warring against the Israelites, is desperate enough to believe this little girl. And Naaman sends out a letter to get to the Israelite king at the time, and somehow it finds its way to the king. But when it gets there, the king is so distraught, because not that his enemy is sending him a letter, but the fact that he's thinking, am I God? How can I heal this person? But then again, somehow by chance, Elisha, who is the prophet of Israel at the time, hears about what the king is distressed about and inquires about it. And then Elisha says in verse 8, let him come to me, talking about Naaman, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. And Elisha sends a messenger back to Naaman and tells him to wash 7 times in the Jordan River, and he will be healed. What happens next is amazing. And it's amazing because he's not healed. Not because God couldn't heal him, not because God wouldn't heal him, but because Naaman was offended at the process of healing. In fact, Naaman was angry because he could have washed in better rivers in Syria. Why do I have to go down to Israel? Do they know who I am? Why are you wasting my time? I don't want to go through that process. I could have taken a few baths in my hometown. I don't need to go to Israelites, and I didn't need some wise man of God to tell me that. Naaman wanted healing, but he wanted it in his way. Naaman even said, I thought you would have waved your hand around and looked all mystical. And it sounded like he wanted some kind of big show, not to just take a couple of baths. He wanted healing, but he didn't want it in God's way. He wanted healing, but he didn't want to go through the process. He wanted to be set free from this thing that held him back, but he didn't want to go through the process. And you have to wonder, you're probably in the same place you are because you're doing the same things you've always done. The question is, do you want to be healed? But the heart of the question is, do you trust me? Jesus wants your heart. Many of us say we would die for Christ, but that is the most often evident if you are willing to live for him right now. Not to leave you hanging, Naaman is eventually healed when one of his servants ran up to him and was able to talk some sense into him. God has a process to heal. The process has boundaries. God is saying, if you trust the boundaries in the process, you're showing that you trust me, and you're showing that you love me. We live in a day that makes ridiculous statements that mean absolutely nothing, like love is love. But the first point we have to get is that love is boundaries. God knows our nature. Now, salvation is the easiest thing because Jesus did everything to save you, but following him takes everything. I think of it this way: salvation costs you nothing, but discipleship costs you everything. God tells us to love one another. And in fact, he comes to him and says, I have this new command for you. But in fact, it's really an old one: love one another. And you have to be thinking, is that really the best you could come up with? Is that the deepest thing you could ever think of? Love one another. But the key is we often treat it like a noun and not like a verb that it really is. Naaman had to do it God's way. What are you doing that is really binding you? Too many of us think of that love is a noun, like it's some sort of commodity that we possess, like it's a feeling that we can hold on to, like it is something that we own. It isn't. It's something that we do. We let people run all over us because we think love is a commodity. We think, well, I love them. I love this person, so I'm going to let them take advantage of me. Or I love, maybe you say, I love God. I just don't follow him. I love God. I love Jesus. He's amazing. I just don't do what he says. I love him. I love the freedom that he offers me. I just don't take him up on the offer. But instead, we try to possess it. But really, it's an action to perform. The next point is that boundaries of your perimeter. You have to set up boundaries around your perimeter. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33 says, do not be misled. That's a key word there. That's an indicator. That means a lot of people are being misled on this. That means this is something that a lot of people don't get. A lot of people are messing up on this. I've messed up on this, and you probably have too. And it says, bad company corrupts good character. I think it might be obvious to a lot of us. It might be. We might think this is completely obvious, this point. We get this. If you let somebody into your life, they will influence you. If you didn't know that, they will. Many of us underestimate the effect people have on us, though. And also on that note, it's not just other people. We now live in a technological, media-driven day where the things that come into us actually affect us as well. We need to think about our perimeter The things that are around us, the things that we surround ourselves with, is not just people, but it's voices. It's not just physical people, but it's ideas that we let into our perimeter, that we let in around us. What are you watching? What are you listening to? Now, we're not thinking in terms of we need to be super moral and we need to keep everything bad out so that we can be good. That's not what it's saying. You are good because the word Jesus spoke to you. It tells us that when Jesus is speaking to his disciples in John chapter 15, verse 15 through 17, and he's talking to them, says, you're already clean because the word I spoke to you. So that's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about what is beneficial for you. We're talking about what's going to set you in the best position so you can serve other people. People without boundaries, people without a perimeter around them, people that don't guard the voices and the people and the influences that come in them are completely or virtually ineffective for the kingdom. And what does that mean? You're robbing yourselves of treasure in heaven. You have salvation if you put your faith in Jesus. Jesus paid the debt. You owe nothing to God because Jesus paid it all. But the Bible tells us we get the opportunity to actually invest into heaven, to invest into our future, our afterlife. And we do that by investing in people right now. But you can't do that if you have no perimeter. Talking to my wife one time, and Laura, she was telling me that there was this one person that she let into her life, and I did too. I was close to this person as well. But there was something that came up with our children, and Laura actually admitted, because she's a little bit more in tune than I am, because I didn't, I think, realize how much I was sliding. But Laura was able to recognize that she began to slip in an area because she would start to question, am I a little too strict on the influence as I let with the kids? And should I let them do these things? This other person that I look up to is doing that. This other person is letting their children play these certain types of games that they're designed where the whole mission in the game is to kill other people or to steal their things, or watching certain movies where point of it is to get pleasure out of sinful, evil things. Maybe I'm just I need to loosen up a little bit, Laura was thinking. But eventually we realized, after this person showed their character, we realized, man, we got to be as far away from that as possible. We need to protect our home. We need to protect what comes into our perimeter, because we don't want anything getting us off course with what God has called us to do because of our own pleasure, because of our own enjoyment. The truth is, those things don't actually lead to pleasure or enjoyment. It's just a distraction, and it's a lie. And Naaman allowed this little girl into his house. Of course, he didn't really think about probably what the implication would be. This little Jewish girl had a massive impact on his entire life because of the positive influence that she was able to bring into that situation. But thankfully for him, this little girl helped him, changed him, and her good character was so good, she was able to benefit Naaman in this way. Naaman was about to make a huge mistake again when he was trying to turn away from the process of healing that God actually laid out for him. Again, thankfully, there was someone in his life that could speak truth to him that was hard to hear, but it was something for his own benefit. Make sure you allow people and you allow voices into your life that can correct you. It is a dangerous place. I don't care who you are. I don't care how popular you are. I don't care how wise you are, how rich you are, how successful you are. If you don't let people in your life that can tell you you're being stupid, you're in a dangerous place. Because we all have blind spots. We all have areas that we don't know are bad for us. That's why they're blind spots. We don't even know that we have them. So you need to have people around you, and I need to have people around me that want the best for me, that aren't trying to use me for their benefit, but somebody that wants the best for my own sake. And one last thing on this, you can have people around you who can talk to you, who can give you advice, but if you never take it, what's the point? Another thing that my amazing wife notices is that when people are around you, you have advice, you have input, but they almost have to give you a level of authority. They almost have to submit to the counsel that you're given, or it's completely wasted. It doesn't change anything. It's just like you're talking about the situation, but no one's willing to do what it takes to get out of the situation because they're not putting in the boundaries. And in closing, the final point I want to talk about, maybe the most important part, is boundaries of your heart. You need to have boundaries for your heart. Proverbs chapter 4, 23 through 26 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Everything that you do flows from it. What does he say? Above all else. Like, this is the one thing that you do. You have to do this. You can't do other things and like, well, I'll get to my heart later. You have to do this. You have to guard your heart. And then the next verses, it runs down and actually tells you how to do it. It tells you what you need to do. So verse 24, 25, and 26, it says, keep your mouth free from perversity. Keep your mouth from corrupt talk. Keep it away from you. You can't just say, well, it just slipped out, or I'll just have a little dirty joke here and there, or I said this and it's not a big deal. These things affect you. The things even you let out, it affects what you let in. It's like a valve almost is what it's showing us here. It's like a valve. When you're letting these things come out of your mouth, you're actually letting something back in. The next verse says, let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. That's where we get this concept of mission focused. That's where the Bible talks about fix your eyes on Jesus. Keep your mind on things above, not on earthly things. We have been designed to be fixed on the goal, fixed on the prize. And who is that? His name is Jesus. We need to keep our eyes on where God is taking us. We need to continue to look to Jesus. What did Jesus do? That's what I want to do. Where is he going? That's where I want to go. Where's the Holy Spirit leading me? That's where I want to lead. I don't want to do what's comfortable. I want to be where Jesus is. The next verse says, give careful thought to the paths of your feet and be steadfast in all your ways. Be careful where you go. It's going to determine often who you are. You got to set up boundaries around your heart. Boundaries are for what comes in and boundaries for what goes out. And God's word tells us how to do this. It's what you say, what you see, and where you go. And I just want to thank you. If this has blessed you, thank you so much that you have just taken the time to listen. But put these things into practice. Get in a group. Talk about it. Confess with one another. You can be healed that way. And make sure you also share this with somebody else, that this could be beneficial to them. And if you haven't subscribed so you can get the latest version every time it comes out, make sure you do that. Greatly appreciate it. And we need to always continue to take God's opportunity of freedom to get a mind reset. You've been listening to REQUIP Ministries, and thanks so much for listening. And go ahead, head on over to our website for more resources. That's requip.org, re-quip.org. And you can always connect with me on social media as well. And until next time, we hope you follow the command to always be prepared for action.